So hello and welcome to another episode of Saga Stories from the Reykjavik Grapevine. My name is Matthew Roby from the University of Iceland, and as always I'll be your host. And we're still here on the beautiful Snæfellsnes Peninsula. And today I'm going to be telling even more tales of the supernatural from my favourite saga of all. That's the 13th century Eyrbyggja saga. We talked about some supernatural women in the previous video, so now we're going to turn our attention to some supernatural men. And to tell our first story, we've come to one of the most spectacular locations on the entire peninsula, and that is the stunning lava field, which is called Berserkjahraun. And we're going to be talking about exactly why it's called that, but you can see just how magnificent it is. Berserkjahraun is just to the south and west of the medieval farmstead of Hraun, which is where a man named Styr Thorgrímsson lives in Eyrbyggja saga. Styr is also known as Víga-Styr or Killer Styr, and this story is a good example of why exactly he gets that name. One of the most striking things about this story is how much it resembles the master builder story type, which is a common story pattern found in lots of myth and folklore, and a famous example of it is also found in the Poetic Edda, something that we will hopefully be talking about in a future video. And it's very likely that it was that version that was the inspiration for this story in Eyrbyggja saga. So like I said, Styr lives on the farm of Hraun, which is just to the north and east of here. And Styr also has a brother who is called Vermundur Mjóvi, which means Vermundur the Slender. And at one point Vermundur travels to Norway, like many people in the sagas do, and he receives the hospitality and the affection of one of the rulers in Norway there at the time. That's Hákon Jarl. And after staying with Hákon for one winter, Vermundur asks that he be allowed to return to Iceland. And the Jarl says, yes, of course you can, and in fact, we've enjoyed having you here so much, why don't you pick a gift for yourself out of anything that I own here? Now it's important to mention that staying with Hákon Jarl at this time are two Swedes named Halli and Leiknir. And these men are said to be incredibly strong and powerful, but also prone to berserker fits, which is something that we mentioned in our video about Egil Saga. As I mentioned in that video, exactly what a berserker fit is can differ from saga to saga. But in this text, it is explicitly said that these men, Halli and Leiknir, are usually calm and easy to deal with, but once they are made angry, they become almost inhuman, mad like dogs, incredibly strong, and also completely fearless. And the saga also shows that they can draw upon this power voluntarily, which makes them exceptionally useful as fighters. So Vermundur Mjóvi, as his name suggests, is well aware that he is weaker both in body and in character than his brother Víga-Styr, and he feels that Styr has never quite treated him as an equal. So he thinks that having these berserkir as bodyguards out here in Iceland might elevate his position here and might make his brother pay him more respect. So when Hákon Jarl asks him, what would you like to choose as your gift, Vermundur says, I'd like to take those two berserkir that you have. Now Hákon Jarl can tell that Vermundur probably isn't the kind of man who can deal with aggressive people like Halli and Leiknir, so he suggests that he pick another gift. But Vermundur is insistent, and so Hákon Jarl agrees, and the berserkers return here with Vermundur to Iceland. However, things quickly turn sour when Vermundur brings them back here. First of all, Vermundur is he's not a particularly aggressive character, and so he doesn't suit the berserkir because he doesn't have the kinds of tasks for him that they would want him to give them, like violent tasks or anything like that. And the other thing is that one of the berserkir, that's I think it's Halli, asks Vermundur whether he can get Halli a wife. Now Vermundur isn't sure about this because he can't imagine finding a woman of good family that will please the berserker, who also is willing to tie herself to a berserker for the rest of her life. So he keeps deferring this question and putting it off. And so after a while, both of the berserkir, they become very irritable about this, and they start to disrespect him and become difficult to deal with. At this point, Vermundr starts to regret taking on the berserkir in the first place, and he has to think of a way that he can get rid of them. And so he decides to hold a feast to which he invites his brother Styr. And at the end of the feast, he speaks to Styr and he offers him the berserkir, as if they were always intended to be a gift to Styr to increase his prowess. Now Styr sees through this bluff very easily and says he doesn't actually want them, since he's heard that they're more trouble than they're worth. But Vermundr is so desperate to get rid of these berserkir that he has to come clean and admit the truth. He never intended them as a gift for Styr, but actually now he needs his brother's help to get rid of them. And so Styr has obviously won this little power play between the two brothers, and meaning that Vermundr's attempt to use the berserkir as a way of levelling the playing field between the two of them has backfired completely. So Styr now brings the berserkir back here to his farm, which is just to the northeast here at Hroin, and the berserkir seem happy enough to go with him. After all, he suits their aggressive personality much more than Vermundr, and he uses them to commit various violent acts. For example, he uses them to help him kill one of his rivals, and this kind of work suits them just great. They love that. But things start to go sour for Styr as well, and it all comes down to romance, just like it did with Vermundr. Halli, one of the berserkir, begins to flirt with Styr's daughter. And Styr doesn't approve of this at all, so he asks Halli to stop doing it, but Halli just doubles down. He says, I wasn't just interested in flirting with your daughter, her name is Austis. I wasn't just interested in flirting with her, I actually want to marry her. And he says that although the berserkir are poor, they will be of greater benefit to Styr because of their physical strength than any alliance with a wealthy farmer in the region. But if Styr declines this offer, the berserkir will leave his service and they will become his enemies. And Halli gives Styr 3 days to think about this offer. And as many people do in Eyrbyggja Saga when presented with a difficult decision, Styr goes and visits his friend Snorri Goði, who is known for giving wise advice. But the saga doesn't divulge what exactly they spoke about, preferring to show the audience their plan as it unfolds. Styr returns to his farm at Hroin, which is here, just to the northeast of the lava field, and he presents Halli with a proposition. He will set Halli and Leiknir some difficult tasks, and if they succeed, he can win Austis' hand in marriage. And the first of these tasks is that they have to clear a path through the lava field here, from Styr's farm to the northeast of the lava field, over to the next farm over, which is called Bjarnarhöpp. So they have to build a path through the lava, which, as you can see from the nature of the lava, would be difficult enough. They also have to build a border wall between the two farms, and then he also wants them to build a stone sheep enclosure on his side of the wall. Now the Swedes agree to these tasks and they set to it. They draw upon their berserk strength and start to achieve these tasks. But while they are doing this, Styr has a special hot bathhouse built on his property with a window through the roof. Which means that you can open the window and pour water onto the stone oven in the middle of the room, creating basically a steam bath. Now, on the last day that the berserkers are completing their work, Styr's daughter Austis walks past them in her finest dress. And the saga doesn't exactly explain why this happens, but audiences might have presumed that Styr sent her there to use her beauty to distract and blind the berserkir to any deceit or danger that might be awaiting them. Now, according to Eyrbyggja Saga and many other sagas in which there are berserker characters, after a berserker has used his berserk rage, he's then drained of all of his energy, sort of supernaturally tired. And this is exactly what happens to the berserkir after they finish their work. They become supernaturally tired. And so they're more than happy to accept Styr's offer of a nice steam bath. And so he takes them to the new steam bath that he has built and lets them inside. Then, once they're inside, he piles rocks up against the door of the steam bath and also lays a wet ox hide in front of the door. And then once he's done that, he opens that roof hatch that I mentioned and pours water down onto the stone oven in the middle of the steam room. And this creates a lot of heat and a lot of steam, and it becomes unbearable for the berserkir to be there. So they start trying to get out, but as I mentioned, Styr had piled rocks up against the door, and so they're trying to bash their way out through the door, and it's very difficult, but ultimately Halli does manage with his shoulder to bash the door open. But as I said, Styr had laid this ox hide in front of the door. Halli slips on the ox hide, and Styr is ready to deal him his death blow. And then of course Leiknir comes out just after his brother, and Styr is able to turn around just quick enough to impale him on his spear as well. And that is the story of how the berserkir meet their end here at the farm at Hroin. And when Snorri Goði comes to visit next, Styr betroths his daughter Ásdís to him, as must have been the plan of the two men all along. So our second story for this video is about one of the most famous ghosts in the whole saga corpus, and that's the ghost of a grumpy old man named Þorólfur Bægifótur. I use the word ghost, but as many of you already know, the restless dead in Old Norse sources are more often reanimated physical corpses than ethereal apparitions, and so a better translation for it might be revenant or even zombie. Such beings are not referred to using consistent terminology in the sagas. They can be called Draugar, Apturgungur, or just Tröll. Now Þorólfur had always been a nasty piece of work, even when he was alive. When he was young, he challenged an old man named Ulfar to a duel over his land at Ulfarsfell here. Knowing that Ulfar was an old man and so probably not able to defend himself during the duel, but also knowing that Ulfar didn't have any children, therefore no one to help him take over in the duel or to get vengeance if Þorólfur succeeds. And Þorólfur, being a younger man, does defeat Ulfar in that duel and wins the land here at Ulfarsfell. But Ulfar, in his youth, had been a great champion, and so apparently he still has enough of his fighting strength to wound Þorólfur in the leg during this duel, so much so that he walks with a limp forever after, and that's why he's called Þorólfur Bægifótur, which means Þorólfur Lamefoot. So Þorólfur wins the land here at Ulfarsfell and establishes a farmstead called Hvammur. The valley here is called Þórsárdalur, and he continues to be nasty throughout his life. He has two children. One of them is the witch Geirríður that we talked about in a previous video about Eyrbyggja Saga, and his other child is Arnkell, who becomes a great chieftain and a much better man than his father. Now Þorólfur only gets more malicious as he gets older. He orders his slaves to commit thefts, including the theft of some hay, and he even orders them to burn one of his neighbours inside their house. Now fortunately they don't succeed in this burning, but Þorólfur's son Arnkell, who is by this time a chieftain in the region, takes this very seriously, and even though they are his father's slaves, he executes them for this attempted burning. Now this sparks a lengthy rivalry, a lengthy dispute between the father Þorólfur and the son Arnkell, which is a bit too complicated to go into here, but the ultimate upshot is that Þorólfur feels betrayed by his son Arnkell. And after having a conversation with him where he expresses how angry he is at his son, he returns here to his farm at Hvammur, and all throughout the night he just sits in his high seat in the main room of his farm. And the rest of the people at the farm go to bed, and when they wake up the next morning they find that Þorólfur is still sitting there in his seat, and apparently he has died. He's still sitting in his seat, and he seems to have died of anger or just seething resentment against how he feels that he's been mistreated by his son. Now perhaps because of his nasty character more generally, or perhaps because of his upright death pose, sitting on a high seat like a vengeful revenant in a grave mound protecting its treasure, it seems clear to everyone that Þorólfur will be a troublesome corpse, so they call upon Arnkell to come and deal with him. So when Arnkell arrives, he tells the rest of the household not to approach Þorólfur from the front until he's managed to close his dead father's eyes. And this is apparently so that they can escape the evil eye, which is a type of curse that some supernatural beings can put on people using their eyes, and it's shown in some other sagas. And so then Arnketl approaches Thorolfr from behind and tries to wrestle him out of his high seat and get him prostrate so that they can carry him off for burial. But the corpse is exerting some kind of supernatural stiffness or supernatural strength, and it resists Arnketl's efforts to manipulate it. But eventually they do manage to wrestle him out of the seat and get him flat, and then they need to get him out of the house. And the way that they do that is they break a hole in the wall and carry the body out through the hole and then wall up the hole again. And the reason for that is apparently so that the ghost won't be able to find its way back in because it didn't leave through the door. And so they attach the body to a sled pulled by oxen, and they try to cart it up Thorsaur Dalur to a place where they'd like to bury it. But the corpse is exerting this supernatural strength, that so much so that even the oxen have trouble dragging him there. But they do finally get him up deeper into the valley, and they bury him under a heavy cairn of stones. But as winter comes that year, and the nights start to get longer and darker, it becomes clear that Thorolfr is not resting peacefully. His reanimated corpse starts driving the livestock crazy. Apparently all the birds that land on his cairn immediately die, and he also starts chasing, attacking and killing people here in the valley. And the darker the nights get into the winter, the closer he comes to the farm buildings, until eventually he can be heard riding the rooftops at night. Now, this is an act that's quite common to saga ghosts and seems to involve the ghost sitting astride the rooftop and kicking or thrusting in a manner that does not seem to be devoid of sexual connotations. It's sort of the ghost expressing his violent domination over the building and its inhabitants. And Thorolfr himself also seems to retain a sexual interest in his former wife. Apparently he assaults her the most, and this drives her crazy, and she dies as a result of it. The only place where people are safe that winter is Arnketl's household. Apparently Thorolfr won't dare to go near it, and so Arnketl invites anyone who doesn't feel safe on their own farm that winter to come and spend the winter with him so that they can escape the depredations of this reanimated corpse. And once the spring comes and the nights get shorter and the ground thaws, Arnketl decides that it will probably be best to move Thorolfr's body out of the valley so that the farms here will be spared from his depredations. So they go up to the top of the valley here and they open up his cairn, and apparently the body of Thorolfr hasn't rotted, but it does look more grotesque than ever. They put the body on another ox-drawn sled and they try to cart it up around Ulfarsfell here over to the fjord that's on the other side. This is Ulfarsfell, this beautiful hillside here. But apparently they have to use at least 2 teams of oxen to do this, partially because of the supernatural weight that Thorolfr is exerting, but also at this point his power has become so strong that he's driving the oxen crazy, and at least one of the teams of oxen breaks loose of their bonds and runs down to the shore on the other side of Ulfarsfell and just dies of sort of supernatural madness. But eventually they do get him to the shore of the fjord on the other side of Ulfarsfell, and they manage to bury him on a headland, which they then call Bægifótshöfði, or the headland of Bægifótur. And apparently Arnketl builds a very high wall all around this headland so that Thorolfr's body can't escape. And apparently this works, at least for a time, because Thorolfr remains quiet for as long as his son Arnketl lives. But the problem doesn't stop there. Here we've come to the eastern side of Ulfarsfell. You remember previously we were on the western side of this long mountain, Ulfarsfell. And here actually is in this little dip in the mountain is where Arnketl used ox-drawn sleds to pull Thorolfr's body up around the fell to bring him to be buried at the side of the fjord here. And we've come here to the location of Bægifótshöfði, or the headland where Thorolfr Bægifótur was buried. And that's here, this flat yellowish headland. That's where Thorolfr's second resting place was. It's where Arnketl builds his wall to keep Thorolfr at bay, and it's where Thorolfr remains quiet for as long as Arnketl lived. But of course, Arnketl didn't live forever, and after he died, Thorolfr started causing problems for the farmers of the region yet again. And some of the smaller scale farmers decide to go to the leading farmer of the region, who at this point is named Thoroddr, and he lives at a farm just at the head of the fjord here. They go to Thoroddr and they implore him to do something about the depredations of the ghost. So they come to Bægifótshöfði and break open the cairn yet again and dig him up for the second time. The saga says that the body still isn't rotted, but now it's turned black and is bloated to the size of an ox. They can't lift him out of the grave, unfortunately, because he's so heavy, but they use levers to pry him out, and then they manage to roll him into a fire and they burn him to ashes here on his headland. But a short while later, one of Thoroddr's female cows is grazing on the grass here, next to Ulfarsfell, and apparently licks some of the stones where the ash had fallen. And also, some fishermen apparently later see this same cow with a mysterious grey bull that they've never seen before, and they don't know what this really means. But in any case, this female cow then disappears for several months, and when it appears again, it's heavily pregnant. And it gives birth to a very large light grey bull. And in fact, this bull apparently is so large that the mother cow dies in the process of giving birth to it. And like I said, this bull is very large, and it also has a very deep, resounding voice when it bellows. And Thoroddr has an elderly pagan foster mother who lives with him at his farm. And she hears the bellowing of this cow, and she advises her foster son to kill the cow because she senses that it will bring danger. In fact, she calls it a trutl, or a troll. But Thoroddr doesn't listen because he thinks that the cow seems very promising, this little grey bull. So instead of killing it, he just hides it in one of his barns where it grows at a supernatural rate. And it also continues to bellow very loudly. And after it's grown quite a bit, its bellows are loud enough again that even though it's been hidden in this barn, it can still be heard by Thoroddr's pagan foster mother. And she's very disappointed in him for lying to her. And she says, really, you have to kill this bull. And she says that if he doesn't kill the bull will bring about his death. Thoroddr doesn't listen. Again, he thinks that this bull is very lovely, it's a very nice looking bull, and he's impressed with how big it's growing. And in fact, he starts to call it Glæsir, which means like glossy, and he calls it that because of its shiny coat. And he doesn't believe that this bull is going to cause any problems. He doesn't believe the pagan foster mother. But of course the audience knows that he should believe her because they can sense that this bull carries within it the spirit of Thorolfr Bægifótr. Now when it comes time to collect the hay in the autumn here at Thoroddr's farm, the bull is running around in the home field and it starts to cause chaos. It starts tossing the haystacks around and bellowing and running around. And apparently it has started to become violent recently, and so they put 2 wooden stocks on its horns to stop it from being able to hurt anybody. But apparently it's broken these stocks off its horns as well. So they think it's going to be a danger to people. So Thoroddr comes out and he's armed with a birch branch and he tries to scare the cow away from the home field to stop damaging the haystacks. And until then, this cow has always been very pleasant and docile whenever Thoroddr tries to deal with it. But now it stands its ground. Thoroddr takes this birch branch that he's got and hits Glæsir on the head with it. But the bull isn't really affected by this and starts charging at him. Now Thoroddr is able to jump out of the way of the bull several times, and then eventually he manages to get on top of the bull, holding onto it around its neck, and then the bull is just riding around with Thoroddr on his back. And eventually the bull manages to toss its head up in such a way that Thoroddr is thrown up into the air, and then Glæsir manages to catch him on one of his huge horns and impales him and kills him. Now, by this time, the farm workers have managed to go and get their weapons, and they come out and chase Gleisir, and they manage to chase him into a bog which is called Heklar, which is apparently also up at the head of the fjord here. They manage to chase it into the bog. The cow runs into the bog, disappears into the mud, and is apparently never seen again. And so here ends the story of Thorolfur Bægifótur, one of the most troublesome ghosts in all of the family sagas. So that's it for another episode of Saga Stories from the Reykjavik Grapevine here on the majestic Snæfellsnes Peninsula. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please remember to like, subscribe and comment below. My name is Matthew Roby from the University of Iceland. I'd like to thank you for watching, and we hope you'll join us again for another episode of Saga Stories in the future. Thank you, and bye for now.